being ridden with an overtense back musculature, or whether the back is smooth and supple. The state of the back is transported via these fascial connections to the locomotive muscles, to the motor, so to speak, and that determines the appearance of the horse's gait.
Abdominal muscles, anatomy and biomechanics. Abdominal muscles and back muscles are locomotion muscles. The abdominal muscles connect the rib cage with the pelvis and can work unilaterally or bilaterally.
Abdominal muscles are locomotion muscles, which actively pull the pelvis and the hindquarters under the horse's trunk.
When a horse is in motion, these muscles do not play any part in carrying the trunk. This function is performed by the upper neck musculature. Only on the basis of these two synergetically operating muscle groups is natural, supple riding possible. Improperly trained horses will be harmed and ultimately destroyed if the upper neck musculature is overtense or incorrectly deployed. The straight abdominal muscles meet in the middle of the underbelly at the so-called white line. This tendinous band has the main stabilizing function on the trunk and makes it possible for the abdominal muscles to move freely. In the three basic gaits, they contract in the suspension phase of the lower limbs. During cantering, the abdominal muscles of each side work almost simultaneously. This is why we see the greatest arching of the back in the suspension phase. In the landing phase and the following weight-bearing phase, the abdominal musculature must relax because the body then has to stretch. It retains only a slight isometric tension, which supports exhalation. In the walk and the trot, the one-sided contractions of the abdominal muscles only move the hind leg on that side of the body. This puts the trunk into a laterally pendulous motion. It always moves towards the relaxed side. Movement studies, biomechanics and making off. The flow of movement can be traced using modern technology such as this treadmill exerciser. We have a 2-beat trot in 4 phases. That applies as much to a wild horse in the Rocky Mountains as to our modern show horses.
The classical riding theories, never mind how old they may be, always make a point of the purity of the gaits.
The mark of good training is that the natural flow of movement is maintained and not destroyed. It must always be borne in mind that a horse is not naturally destined for carrying weights, but for running and for fleeing from predators.
It must be our mission to develop the body of the horse, to form it and positively influence it rather than destroying it.
Classical riding theories show how this can be done.
Try to imagine what it would be like to see a dog or a cow carrying a burden. We would be quite surprised and ask ourselves what was happening. But we've got used to this with horses. It goes as a matter of course. We should remind ourselves that this body, too, has had to develop itself and in the course of a long time transform itself into an athlete.
In the last century, the term remount phase was coined for this first phase of development in young horses. It continued for 2 years, and in that time great store was set by an unconstrained bodily posture. The body of the horse is strengthened in such a way that the equestrian influence blends with the horse and its natural flow of movements is not disturbed.
With the help of high-resolution equipment, the movement analysis or the exerciser clearly shows how a forced head-neck position negatively or positively affects walking, trotting, or cantering. Walking consists of a clear 4-beat rhythm in 8 phases. This gait reacts very sensitively to a forced head posture.
The 13-year-old show jumper Störtebeker is well used to being on the exerciser. The horse does not command the basic gaits of a dressage horse, but there are only a few horses which do not become flustered by all the technical apparatus around the ergometer. Even so, the fundamental principles of a horse's pattern of movement can be seen through this analysis. The 3D animation is based on the data gained in this way. The walk. Definition and assessment. The walking gait is composed of a 4-beat rhythm in 8 phases. The 4-year-old gelding shown here has a pleasing regular gait, covering considerable ground. It has a very good set of the head and neck for a riding horse. The gelding is inclined to curl up or go behind the bit. Its rider must always be sure not to allow it to get too deep in the horse's frame. During training, improving its contact must be given high priority. To be able to retain this good quality of gait, it is important to exercise a very sensitive equestrian influence, especially with careful use of the reins. The relaxed, alternating activity of the long back muscles is the prime prerequisite for an authentic walk. While walking, the contraction phase of the long back muscle begins at the moment the foreleg on the same side leaves the ground. The trunk, now suspended, is carried by the tensed long back muscle and its extension over the croup and the hamstrings up to the corresponding hind leg. The long back muscle on the opposite side relaxes, allowing the limbs on the same side to move towards each other. The side view shows a distinct V shape. Also, the sequences shown make it clear why the nodding and oscillating movement of the neck and head are an absolute must to ensure that the back musculature does not become too tense. Another sign of good training is a smooth walk covering a lot of ground.
It goes without saying that the rider should orientate himself on the horse's anatomy. Any influence which does not take account of the horse's anatomical characteristics will have harmful consequences. In my opinion, proper equitation is only possible on the basis of a knowledge of anatomy.
As a young rider in my first years in competitive riding, I made many mistakes. It can't be said that my riding has always been impeccable. I too caused my favorite mare harm, and I had to acknowledge that the classical riding theories show the way to carry out the training of horses without negative consequences.
I've also ridden a horse to ruin. I'm not proud of that at all. But if I'd had the knowledge and technology that's available today, I wouldn't have made those mistakes. Goodness knows how many competition riders still ride the way I used to. The walk. Negative examples. If the control on the pole is maintained by forced tension on the reins, this will automatically lead to a stiffening of the back musculature. Also, an acute angle between the head and the forward neck vertebrae blocks the nape of the neck and mechanically prevents the horse from achieving proper flexion. There are 2 finger-sized bony protrusions located to the left and right of the occipital bone of a horse's skull. If the head-to-neck positioning of the skull is too cramped, the protrusions connect with and block the first neck vertebra. The horse can then no longer move its neck to one side, flexion is no longer possible. Persistently framing the horse by mechanical influence of the hand leads to the dissolution of the 8 phases of the walk because of the negative back tension described previously. A so-called phase shift results. As a consequence, there is a more or less pronounced one-sided flow of movement in the footfall sequence. This kind of negatively developed walk is called a lateral walk, leading to what is known as a pace-like walk.
In dressage circles, one often hears, "Oh well, it doesn't matter, it's a Grand Prix horse, so it's obviously not going to have such a good walk." Such an explanation just sounds absurd when one has understood that classical riding theory really demands an improvement in the basic quality of the primary gait.
In this respect, the ethical precepts of the German Riding Association apply, to which all riders are formally bound by their own signature. And there it is stated in all clarity, the principle of harmony goes before the principle of performance. The enslavement of the horse in the name of higher performance simply cannot be an option in equestrian sports.
The gelding already shown does not react to a temporarily dominant hand influence with a corresponding clear phase shift in its gait. Unfortunately, a pace-like walk cannot be clearly demonstrated.
An extremely dominant rider's hand leads to overtensing of the back. An increasing overtensioning of the long back muscles leads to a further lateralization of the walk. And in an extreme case, the horse is quite unable to walk at all.
I often have the feeling that many Grand Prix riders do not bother with the equine anatomy, nor with equine psychology, so they have no idea what they can demand of the horse. For instance, that long back muscle is not load-bearing, as I thought up until now. I hope that many trainers will now make less mistakes and not blame the horse when something does not seem to function properly.
Absolute elevation, brought about by strong mechanical hand influence, has the greatest effect on the walk. A horse with a short, muscular, or extremely long, yielding back reacts more spontaneously than a properly built horse.
The walk is the gait which is most prone to disturbance. Disturbance on account of the influence of the hand.
An unmistakable 4-beat walk with its 8 phases reveals the quality of a horse's basic training. If this system is disturbed, or even ruined, then the whole dressage is basically worthless. Therefore, judges should pay much more attention to the walk during dressage tests in order to filter out the badly trained horses.
If I have a musical ear, then I can tell if a note in the melody being played is off-key. When I hear that, then I write down fault, -1 point or whatever. And then there's no point in further discussion. But how can I prove it? One person says I didn't hear it, the next one says I did. The judge says I did not see that there was a beat fault. That's the problem. Everybody saw it except the judge.
The kind of judges' decisions which are current today suggest that a poor walk is only seen as a minor fault.
Then, if the influence of the hand is extreme, as in extreme cases of riding the horse behind the bit, it is not surprising that the beat of the walk is disturbed. The beat is the most difficult thing to judge. I think many judges are moving away from the assessment of the beat to assessing the ground coverage.
I don't understand that the judges give high marks to a horse that paces in the walk and has a 4-beat canter. These are really against the classical principles of dressage training.
The trot, definition and assessment. The trot is a 2-beat gait in 4 phases with a suspension phase. With the authentic trot, the suspended diagonal pair of legs is parallel in respect of the hind cannon bone and the lower arm of the opposite foreleg. This degree of parallelity is characteristic of, amongst others, the back mover. As with the walk, the long back muscles operate in an alternating mode during the trot. When the back musculature is not over-tensed, it allows the deep loin and abdominal musculature on one side to draw the corresponding hind leg under the body, so that good hind leg engagement is achieved for the gait in question.
The accordion-like movement of the painted-on ribs demonstrates the function of the abdominal musculature. During the contraction phase, the hind leg on the same side is drawn under the body. In a canter, they do this almost simultaneously, moving the entire pelvis.
The abdominal muscles are locomotive muscles. This is shown clearly by the behavior of the rib movements. During the trot, too, a long top neckline with an open neck angle is an essential prerequisite for maintaining a free and natural pattern of movement. In correct training, the fundamental principles of beat, looseness and contact are taken into account.
Contact, the third point in the training scale of classical riding theory, is what happens when a horse sensitively seeks the rider's hand. Contact is only possible when the horse's back, the center of movement, is able to transmit the impulse of the hind leg smoothly and without overtension. Only a horse which strides from the back to the front, allowing the rider a supple seat, can ensure that the contact is of a really high quality.
This 4-year